Coming up, the cherry blossoms have arrived. In this episode, we capture a series of images to build a composite of the mighty Pikes Peak, rising above a forest of luminous flowers. And to top things off, we face off against the AI robot monsters to see who will be champion of the landscape photography springtime spectacular. When it comes to spring flowers, time is of the essence. The blossoms are only around for a couple of weeks, and this can only mean one thing. We better get started. A few years back, I shot this image. It depicts a series of beautiful ruby cherry blossoms with Pikes Peak rising majestically in the distance. Now, as with all things progress, these trees have since been cut down in favor of yet another cookie-cutter apartment complex. Since trees don't pay rent, naturally, they had to go. Sadly, it didn't take long to determine that we had lost a one-of-a-kind composition. And now, the only way to recreate another image like this is to go full Dr. Frankenstein. We need to go dig up a bunch of different body parts from all around the city and smash them together into one final composite. Good morning, friends, and welcome to beautiful Colorado Springs. It is an absolutely spectacular day for photography, and we are here on location to capture our first component for our composite image. Now, I've chosen this spot because it offers up a really amazing view of the mighty Pikes Peak, as you can see there in the distance. So, let's go take a look at our scene. All right, so as you can see, we're actually quite a long distance from Pikes Peak. There is a huge amount of cityscape in between us and the mountain, and I don't want to include that cityscape in my image. Therefore, we have loaded up the trusty 70 to 300 millimeter lens, which is going to enable us to zoom in and get a very close, tight panoramic portrait of the mountain itself, thus excluding all of the cityscape that you see here. All right, so we've talked a little bit about composition, and now I want to take a moment to talk about time and location. We're actually standing here in the month of March, and the interesting part of all this is that the cherry blossoms will not bloom in Colorado Springs for another 2 months. So we've got a long time to wait until we can capture the next component of our composite image. It's actually about 10 degrees below zero right now, so it is very cold. Hang on a second, did I just say that it was 10 degrees below zero? That seems a little extreme. Okay, yes, it does get very cold in Colorado, but this is not the North Pole. So I checked the logbook, and it turns out it was actually 10 degrees above zero. Still very cold, but ultimately just a little glitch in the matrix, so nothing to worry about. All right, back to the show. But we've chosen this time of year because there is a lot of snow up on the peak. If we were to wait until May, when the cherry blossoms are actually coming out, we may not actually be able to capture the peak with the right amount of snow. And so in order to build out a beautiful composite, you don't necessarily have to shoot everything at the same time. A good composite can span months, sometimes even years, before you capture the right number of components to put everything together. And so always keep in mind the time of year that you shoot can play a big role in how you plan out your creative workflow. The first part of our scavenger hunt is very productive. The mountain provides a nice series of images for us to work with. After several weeks of chasing snowstorms, our library of panoramic Pikes Peak portraits is starting to look pretty good. And now that we have the backdrop squared away, it's time to go and find a new grove of cherry trees which has not been slated for the chopping block. I know I tend to get all melodramatic about cutting down trees, but on the bright side, Colorado Springs does have an abundance of blooming trees, which will hopefully never face the wrath of the developers' chainsaws. They just so happen to reside in somewhat unusual locations. All right, friends, welcome to part 2 of our little composite adventure. Now, it might be hard to believe, but it has been over a month and a half since we shot our last location over at Pikes Peak. So it just goes to show that time is relevant when you're building out these composite images. Fortunately, we are here right in the middle of spring, which means that all of our crabapple blossoms in Colorado Springs are in full bloom. So let's go take a look at our new scene. So this location is obviously ridiculous. We're standing in the middle of a parking lot with an absolutely raging highway going on right behind us. It's incredibly noisy. This is not what you would consider to be a normal landscape photography environment. But again, we're only grabbing one piece of the puzzle to build out a greater composite. So this, with all of its chaos, is actually gonna fit just great into our final scene. That's the beauty of composite work, is that we're only gonna take a certain slice out of this scene. We're not necessarily here to use the entire thing. massive trucks going by. But at the end of the day, the viewer who sees our final product is never gonna know the difference. As you can see, landscape photography locations are not always out in the wilderness. Quite often, we can produce some really nice work without ever leaving town. With our grove of trees freshly harvested within the camera, we now have enough material to make several composite images. The new work lends a little bit of variety to this concept of spring blossoms and snowy mountains. And then, just when we think we might be all finished, something unexpected happens. So, I've pretty much spent the entire episode talking about shooting images in different locations and at different times of year. And then lo and behold, I stumble across a location with a beautiful row of cherry trees lined up perfectly against the mountain. And then to put the icing on top of the cake, we get a late spring snowstorm. So by some miracle, all of the elements have coalesced into one place. We get to shoot a real location with real old school photography, and it's way better than any composite that I could ever make. Let's face it, when it comes to photography, we get our butts kicked. A lot. But every once in a while, you actually catch a break. As the spring snowstorm thrashes about, the new location delivers a splendid new image all at once. There is no zipping around town, digging up body parts from different locations in hopes of creating Frankenstein's monster. The viewfinder has everything we need, just like in the old days. And per usual, Mother Nature, with a little help from the corporate landscaping team, turns out a much better product than we could ever come up with in the composite world. And so, after all of the overcomplicated fuss, we end up with one shot to rule them all. Now, just to keep things interesting, it's time to pick a fight with the AI robot monsters. The last couple of times we went up against the machines, we took a pretty nasty beating because it turns out the robots are getting really darn good at creating artwork. So why do we keep comparing ourselves to AI? Because photography is pain. And even before AI ever came around, we always managed to find new ways to suffer. The last-minute photograph, which was born of the spring snowstorm, does provide a little extra confidence going into the AI challenge. But the robots have proven themselves to be very prolific artists. Within mere minutes, the machines have generated a series of images which I have to admit are quite compelling. We see all the hallmarks of a great landscape photography formula being incorporated into each new image. Sunlight cascades across vibrant flowers, which fill each and every tree. Rows of cherry trees create leading lines, sending the viewer's eyes to the distance, where the mountain serves as a focal point. We see breaking clouds rising off articulate snowy peaks, and all in all, the machines have created a very nice set of postcards. And if any of these images were hanging in a gallery next to the real photography, I dare say the machines would probably be making some very competitive sales against the humans. And this brings us back to the argument that is popping up across photography communities all over the world. With AI becoming this powerful, why even bother to pull the camera out of the bag? To this, I reiterate the philosophy that I developed at the very beginning of AI. No matter how good the machines become, and they are becoming very good, photography will always be about the experience. I spent a lot of days breathing in the cool morning air, trekking across town, searching for blossoms, and waiting on clouds to break off of the mountains. For me, this is time well spent, and I for one am very grateful for every single mile that I put in. Sure, AI can spit out a great image in a matter of seconds, but I got to go outside and experience these magical places in real life. And that, for me, is well worth the effort. All right, friends, that's going to do it for this episode. As always, thank you so much for joining us. If you had fun on our little composite adventure, be sure to leave a comment down below. I'd like to hear what you have to think. Also, be sure to like and subscribe to this channel. There's a lot of cool new stuff coming up, and I don't want you to miss out. That's going to do it for now. We'll see you in the next lesson.